The room went quiet, and the Duke of Ithan understood, before he had found her in it, that the silence was about him. 200 people at a musical evening in Harcourt House do not stop speaking all at once for nothing. He stood at the top of the stairs with his card still in the footman's hand, and felt the hush come toward him across the crowd like a change in the wind. And then it opened. The whole glittering length of the room opened, the way a crowd opens when it wants to see something. And at the far end of it, standing at the pianoforte in silver-gray silk with her hand resting on the case, was Clemence Vaughan. She was looking at him. Lucien Ferrars had faced a great deal in 36 years. He had never in his life wanted so badly to be somewhere else. He should have known. That was the first coherent thought he managed, and it arrived with the particular bitterness of a thing that had been available to him all week. Everybody in London had been talking for a month about the Vaughan heirs, and about the young woman Lady Marybourne had taken up, and he had not once, not one single time, put the name together with the woman, because in his mind she had stopped existing a year ago in a drawing-room at Ithan, and people who stop existing do not go on to be talked about in London. The whisper had begun somewhere behind him. He could hear the shape of it without hearing the words. Somebody said Ithan and somebody else said her, and a dowager near the doorway said, in the carrying voice of the deliberately deaf, "Oh dear. Oh, this will be worth the journey." Clemence Vaughan inclined her head to him, exactly as much as was required, not a fraction more. Then she turned to the elderly woman beside her, small, upright, ferocious, a diamond the size of a hazelnut at her throat, and said something, and the elderly woman laughed, and the room, released, began to talk again at twice its former volume. The Duke of Ithan walked down the stairs into it. A year before, in the yellow drawing-room at Ithan Chase, 22 people had been at tea. He remembered the number. He had counted them afterwards over and over, the way a man counts stairs in the dark. 22. His mother, his Uncle Rupert, the Estcourts, the Winfanes, 2 clergymen, Lady Sarah Down and her 3 daughters, and at the low end of the room, by the tea urn, in a brown merino gown with her hair pinned flat, his mother's companion. Companion was the word on the household books. It had not been the word in his own head for 6 months. In his own head there had been a great many other words, formed on winter evenings in the music-room at Ithan, while a young woman played his mother to sleep. And then, when the Duchess was safely dozing, played other things, her own things, strange spare little airs in minor keys that Lucien had sat in the dark to hear, and had never once had the courage to ask the name of. He had kissed her hand in the corridor in September. He had said things in the orangery in October that a gentleman does not say without meaning them. And on the 14th of November, at tea, his Uncle Rupert had said, pleasantly, to the room, "Ithan, tell us, is it true you mean to marry your mother's music-mistress?" 22 people had turned. Lucien Ferrars had had perhaps 3 seconds. He had thought about them since for a year. 3 seconds turned over and over until they wore smooth, and he still could not entirely explain what had happened in them, only that the room had been very warm, and his uncle had been smiling, and Lady Sarah Down's eldest daughter had made a small sound of amusement, and that some old cold ducal reflex had come up out of the floor of him and taken his mouth before his heart could reach it. "Miss Vaughan," he had said, "is my mother's companion, nothing more. I should be obliged if the joke were not repeated." Nothing more. He had not looked at her. That was the part he could not get past, not the words, which were bad enough, but that in the whole minute afterwards he had not once turned his head toward the tea urn, because he had known what he would see there and had not been brave enough to see it. She had not made a scene. He had been braced, God help him for a scene for tears, for a plate set down too hard for the door. Instead, Clemence Vaughan had finished pouring Lady Sarah Downe's tea and carried it to her, and asked whether she took sugar. She had stayed in the room for 40 more minutes. She had turned the pages for one of the Down girls at the instrument and complimented her touch, which was atrocious. She had wished everybody a good evening at the proper time, and gone upstairs. And at 9 the next morning she had come to the Duchess's dressing room and given a month's notice in the most correct terms imaginable, citing a wish to be nearer her mother's people in the West. She had left Ithan Chase on the 11th of December in the carrier's cart, having declined the offer of a carriage. She had left one thing behind, which Lucien found in the music room on the evening of the 11th, propped on the stand where he could not miss it. A single sheet of music paper, ruled and copied fair in her small hand, one of the minor key airs he had sat in the dark for. There was no letter with it. At the top, where a composer writes a dedication, there was nothing at all, only a space, carefully left, and a fine ruled line, as though a name had been meant to go there and had been found, on consideration, not to be available. He had ridden to the West in February, and found that she had never gone to her mother's people, and that there were, in fact, no mother's people. Now she was standing under the Harcourt chandeliers in silver-gray silk, and the room had gone quiet for her, and it had been a year, and he had come to a musical evening because his sister had bullied him into it. Ithan, Lady Marylebone got to him before he had crossed a third of the room. She was 71 and came up to the middle of his waistcoat, and had once, by common account, made a prime minister apologize in his own hall. "You have grown thin, guilt or the fashion." "Ma'am." "Do not ma'am me, boy, I dandled your father. You know why the room stopped." "I do." Everybody in it knows the story. It got out, not from her. She has never said one word of it in 11 months, which I may tell you has been extremely inconvenient of her. It got out from your Uncle Rupert, who repeated his own joke at a dinner in Grosvenor Square, and did not understand that the fashion had turned. The old woman's eyes were black and merciless. There are 200 people here tonight who came to hear the Vaughan airs, and every one of them now knows that the composer of them was called nothing more, in a duke's drawing-room, in front of 22 people, by the duke. 22, said Lucien. Yes. Something flickered across Lady Marybourne's face, surprise, possibly respect, gone too fast to hold. She is my companion, she said. That is the word on my household books. It is not the word anywhere else. She has an establishment of her own in Wells Street, and a publisher, and £140 a year of her own earning, and when I die she will have Marybourne's Kentish property, which is entailed on nobody and mine to give, and I have told her so in writing so that she cannot be talked out of it by anybody's uncle. She snapped her fan open. Now go and speak to her, and do it in the middle of the room where they can all see, and do it badly, because if you do it smoothly, I shall never forgive you. He did it badly. She was standing by the instrument with 3 men around her. One of them Sir Gervase Wint, who had money and a Norfolk seat, and the manner of a man who had already spoken to a lawyer. And she watched Lucien Ferrars come the last 20 feet with an expression of perfect, terrible courtesy. Your Grace, said Clemence Vaughan, and curtsied. Miss Vaughan, he bowed, straightened, found that the entire English language had gone out of him. You have. I am very well, thank you. Your mother's people, said Lucien, in the West. The 3 men glanced at each other. There are none, said Clemence pleasantly. I invented them for the Duchess's convenience. It is easier for a household to lose a companion who is going to relations than one who is going to a lodging in Bath with £4 and a letter of character. Your mother was very kind to me, Your Grace. I did not wish her to lie awake. Bath, he said. You went to Bath. I accompanied singers at 3 shillings an evening at the lower rooms, and I copied parts for a music seller in Milsom Street at a penny the page. And in March, a gentleman of the orchestra asked whether the air I had been playing to warm my hands was published, and I said that it was not, and he said that it ought to be. She smiled. It did not reach anywhere near her eyes. That is the whole of the story. There is nothing romantic in it. It is a year of penny-a-page copying, and my hands are the worse for it, and I would not undo 1 hour. Miss Vaughan. They are waiting for me to play, said Clements. Do stay, it is the E minor, you will know it. She sat down at the pianoforte, and 200 people found chairs and doorways and the edges of tables. And she played the air that had stood on a music stand at Ithan Chase on the 11th of December, with the space for a dedication carefully ruled and left empty. The Duke of Ithan stood at the back of the room among the standing men, in front of every soul in London who knew what he had said, and listened to the sound of exactly what he had thrown away. He behaved for 11 days exactly like a duke, and it answered exactly as well as a duke deserved. He sent a pianoforte, a Broadwood grand, the best instrument in London, delivered to Wells Street by 4 men and a wagon, and it was in the street again inside the hour with a note that said, Your Grace, my rooms are on the 2nd floor, and the ceiling would not bear it, and neither would my reputation. He bought the airs, every copy in Palmer's window in Bond Street, 41 of them, and by that evening it was all over town that the Duke of Ithan had bought out the shop, and the shop had reprinted twice, and Clements Vaughan's publisher wrote him a letter of such warm gratitude that Lucian burned it. He went to Lady Marylebone and offered, in a form of words he had spent 2 hours constructing, to be of use. Of use, said the old woman. Ithan, sit down. You have the look of a man carrying a hat he cannot find a table for. She waited until he sat. Listen to me. You have been 3 days trying to buy back the last 12 months, and it cannot be done, because the 12 months are the only thing she owns outright. Everything else in her life was given her by somebody, her post by your mother, her Kentish property by me, her fame by a fiddler in Bath who happened to have an ear. The year of penny-a-page copying is hers. Do not you dare try to make it not have happened. Then what is a man to do? How the devil should I know? Nobody has ever asked me. Men in your position do not ask. That is the whole of the trouble with your position. She looked at him for a while. You might begin by finding out what you actually did. You are extremely sorry, Ithan. It is written all over you, and it is very becoming, and it is entirely useless, because you are sorry about a sentence. Ask yourself why you said it, and do not tell me it was pride. That is what men say when they wish to stop thinking. He went to Wells Street the next morning and proposed, which was the stupidest thing he did all year. Her rooms were small and clean, and the light was good. There was an old square piano with 2 keys mended in a different wood, and manuscript paper in stacks weighted with a flat iron, and a hard chair, and 1 good chair which she gave him, and a stove that did not draw. Her hands, when she took the shawl off her shoulders, had ink in the creases of the right fingers that would not come out. Miss Vaughan, said the Duke of Ithan, standing in the middle of the floor because he could not sit, you know why I have come. Everything I said in the orangery at Ithan in October was true when I said it, and has been true every day since, and everything I said in the yellow drawing-room in November was a lie. I want to spend the rest of my life saying so. Marry me. Clements Vaughan set the shawl over the back of the hard chair very carefully, as though it mattered where it went. No, she said. I will wait as long as— Your Grace, listen to me, because I shall only be able to do this once. She turned. She was pale, and her voice was steady in the way that cost something. You have not understood what you did. You think you insulted me. You did not particularly. I was my mother's companion and then your mother's, and there is no shame in it. And if you had said to that room, she is my mother's companion and I intend to marry her, I would have gone through fire for you. That is not what happened. I know what happened. You do not. She pressed her hands together. There were 22 people in that room, and your uncle asked you a question, and in 3 seconds you looked at your whole life, the chase, the name, the county, the men at your table, and you looked at me, and you decided that I was the thing that was easiest to put down, not the wickedest thing, the lightest. And you were right, Your Grace, that is the horror of it. I was the lightest thing in the room, and everybody there knew it, and you told them all that they had been right to know it. And then you did not look at me for 40 minutes. Her voice cracked once, and she mastered it. I could have borne the sentence. I have not been able to bear the 40 minutes. Lucien Ferrars stood in a cold second-floor room in Wells Street, and had no defense of any kind. And now, said Clemens, you have come with a proposal 11 days after 200 people saw you look a fool, and you cannot tell, you cannot possibly tell, and neither can I, how much of it is love and how much of it is a man who has discovered that the lightest thing in the room turned out to weigh something after all, and would like it back now that it is worth having. So the answer is no. And it must be no even if you are right about yourself, because I have no way on earth of proving that you are. Then tell me what would prove it. Nothing, she said. That is what I have been trying to tell you all week. There is nothing you can do. It is not a thing that can be mended by doing. There must be something you want. And Clemens Vaughan laughed one short unhappy sound and said, Yes, of course there is. I want my father's name back, and he has been dead 6 years, and you cannot give me that either. Good morning, Your Grace. He was halfway to Grosvenor Square before it caught him. He stopped in the middle of the pavement so abruptly that his own footman trod on his heel. Her father's name. He had known, he had been told, once, in November, 4 days before the yellow drawing-room, and he had put it away in the place where a man puts things that would be inconvenient to examine. His uncle Rupert had come to him in the gun-room at Ithan with the air of a man performing a painful duty, and had said, Before this goes further, you had better know what she is. Her father was Edmund Vaughan, the organist, you will not remember, you were at school, who had the collecting of the subscription for the county infirmary concerts, £340 of it, and it was found short, and he was prosecuted at your own father's suit, and he died in the debtor's ward at Caudry Jail in the winter of 6 years ago, still owing it. That is the family. There is a thief in it. And Lucien had said he could hear himself saying it in the gun-room with a fowling piece in his hands. Thank you, uncle. I had not known. He had never asked one further question. Not one. Not who had audited the subscription, not who else had handled the money, not whether Edmund Vaughan had ever offered a defense, not why a man who had stolen £340 had died owning nothing but a violin and a daughter. He had simply taken a fact from the man who most wanted him to have it, and 4 days later, when the room turned, the fact had been sitting in him like a stone in a shoe, and it had come out of his mouth as nothing more. He did not go to Grosvenor Square. He went to Ithan Chase that night on horseback for the first 50 miles, because the roads were dry and he could not sit still in a carriage. It took him 9 days in the estate office, and he did it himself with the door locked, because he had discovered a distaste for asking anybody in his family for help. The subscription books for the infirmary concerts were in the 4th press, in 3 ledgers bound in green vellum, and they had not been opened since the year they were closed. Lucien read them the way he had once read nothing in his life, line by line, with a candle at his elbow and a sheet of paper for the sums. Edmund Vaughan, organist, had collected the money. He had entered every shilling of it in a small hand not unlike his daughter's, and every entry was initialed and dated, and the total at the foot of the 3rd page was £341 11, and beneath it, in a different ink and a different hand, was the note: paid over to the treasurer, Mr. J. Boulay, this 4th day of August, and Boulay's initials beside it. Boulay, Lucien sat back. Josiah Boulay had been the Ithan estate's own steward for 19 years, and treasurer of every charitable subscription in the county, because it was easier to give the office to a man who was already handling money. Boulay had gone to Ireland in the autumn of that year on the estate's business, and had died at Waterford of a fever, and the old Duke had said at the time that it was a great loss. It took Lucien 2 more days to find the rest, and when he found it, it was not hidden at all. It was in the old Duke's private letter book, filed under the month it arrived, in a bundle tied with tape and marked in his father's hand: Boulay accounts to be looked into. A letter from Waterford, dated 11 days before Boulay died. 4 sides of it in a shaking hand, and it began: My Lord Duke, being very ill and not likely to see England again, I am to tell your grace of certain sums. The Duke of Ithan read it twice, and then went and stood at the window of the estate office, and looked out at his own park in the March rain for a long time. Boulay had taken the concert subscription, all of it, and 4 other funds beside, over 11 years, and had confessed the whole in 4 sides of paper to save his soul, and had named Edmund Vaughan expressly, and at length as knowing nothing whatever of it. The letter had reached Ithan Chase on a Tuesday. Lucien's father had endorsed it, and tied it up and filed it, and had not withdrawn the prosecution, and Edmund Vaughan had died in the debtor's ward at Caudry Jail 14 months later. There was one further paper in the bundle, and it was in his Uncle Rupert's hand, and it was a note of advice, and it said, in substance, that as Boulay was dead and the money gone and the estate's name concerned in it, and as Vaughan was a person of no consequence with no means of pursuing the matter, the kindest course as well as the most prudent would be to let the thing lie. Lucien Ferrars stood in the room where his family had kept that letter for 7 years, and understood that, when he had said nothing more in the yellow drawing-room, he had not been inventing anything. He had simply been the second man in that family to say it, and the first had left the proof in a drawer. He did not write to her about it. That was the hardest single choice of his life, and he made it at 4 in the morning in the estate office with the letter half begun in front of him, and then put the pen down and burned the sheet. If it went to her first, it would be a gift. It would be a duke laying a thing at a woman's feet with his hand out behind him for the answer. And she had told him, in a cold room in Wells Street, that there was nothing he could do, which meant that the only honest way to do it was to do it as though she would never hear of it at all. So he did it in the wrong order on purpose, and it took 5 weeks. He began with the trustees of the county infirmary, 6 men, 3 of them older than his father would have been, convened in the long room at the Ithan estate office on a Monday morning, with the green vellum ledgers on the table, and Boulay's 4 sides from Waterford lying open beside them. "You will read that first," said the Duke of Ithan, "and then I shall tell you what my family did with it." They read it. One of the old men had to be given a glass of wine. "The letter reached this house on the 12th of October," said Lucien, "and was endorsed by my father to be looked into and tied up and put in the fourth press. The prosecution of Edmund Vaughan was not withdrawn. He was committed for the debt in the following March, and died in the debtor's ward at Caudry Jail 14 months after this letter was filed, still owing £341 11 shillings which he had collected honestly, entered honestly, and paid over to a thief who was my own steward. There is a further paper. It is in my uncle's hand, and it advises that as the man was of no consequence and the estate's name concerned, the thing had better lie. He set that page down on top of the others. I shall not ask any of you to be kind about it. I have had 5 weeks to be sick about it, and I recommend the experience. It was done properly, which meant slowly, and Lucien made himself take every step in public. The trustees resolved that the accounts of that subscription be reopened and restated. The restatement, over the signatures of all 6, found that Edmund Vaughan had never had 1 penny of the money after the 4th of August, and stood clear of the whole. The Duke of Ithen paid the £341 11 shillings into the infirmary's funds out of his private purse, with interest at 5% for 11 years, which came to a sum his lawyer described in writing as unnecessary, and Lucien instructed his lawyer to file the objection and pay the money. The prosecution had been at the old Duke's suit. The record of it stood in the county's books, and in the vestry minutes of the parish, where Vaughan had been organist for 19 years, in which he was described as having absconded from his duty in disgrace. Lucien went before the vestry himself, in a small cold room with 11 farmers and a rector, and asked that the entry be corrected, and the correction read aloud at the next Sunday's meeting, and answered questions for 1 hour and 10 minutes, some of them not kind. He had the notice printed in the county paper, and in 2 London papers, 4 inches of it, over his own name, not the trustees', his own beginning with the words, "The public is to know that a wrong was done in this county 11 years ago, by the late Duke of Ithen and afterwards concealed with the knowledge of his family, and that the present Duke, having found the proof of it in his own house, is bound to state it plainly." His uncle Rupert came to Ithen Chase the day the notice appeared, in a state Lucien had never seen him in. "You have put your father's name in a newspaper," said Rupert Ferrars. "I have put the truth in a newspaper. My father's name was in it already. It was on the indictment. Do you understand what you have done to this family?" "Yes," said Lucien. "I have made it honest at the cost of being laughed at, which is the cheapest price anything in my life has ever cost, and I would have paid it 4 days before that tea if I had asked you one single question instead of thanking you." He did not raise his voice. He had discovered that he did not need to. "You are no longer a trustee of the infirmary. The board accepted your resignation on Monday, and I wrote it for you. You will not be at my table again this year. I am not able to be angrier with you than I am with myself, uncle, and that is the only thing standing between you and something worse." There remained the 22. He wrote to all of them, every soul who had been in the yellow drawing-room on the 14th of November, from his own mother down to the 2 clergymen and Lady Sarah Down and her 3 daughters, and asked them to come to Ithen Chase on the 19th of April at 3 in the afternoon, and gave no reason. They came, of course they came. He had the room set as it had been. The tea urn at the low end. The same chairs. He had thought a great deal about whether to invite Clemence Vaughan, and had decided against it in about 4 seconds, on the grounds that a man who has used a woman as the lightest thing in a room does not then use her as an audience. He stood where he had stood. "You were all here on the 14th of November," said the Duke of Ithen, "when my uncle asked me whether I meant to marry my mother's music-mistress, and I said that Miss Vaughan was my mother's companion and nothing more. I have asked you here to say 4 things about that, and then you shall have your tea, and I shall not speak of it again. The first is that I was in love with her, and had said so to her in the orangery 6 weeks before, and knew perfectly well what I was denying. The second is that I said it because 4 days earlier I had been told that her father was a thief, and had chosen not to ask a single question about it, and the stone was in my shoe. The proof that he was innocent was in this house, in the 4th press, in my father's own letter book, and had been for 7 years. It has now been published and the accounts restated and the vestry entry corrected. Mr. Edmund Vaughan was an honest man who was ruined by my steward, prosecuted by my father, and left in a debtor's ward by my family's convenience, and he died there. The third is that I did not look at her for 40 minutes afterwards, which I understand to be the actual injury, and for which there is no restitution of any kind. And the fourth is that every one of you heard me say it and none of you contradicted me, and I do not blame you for that, because you were in a duke's drawing room and I was the duke. That is what the thing is for. I have spent a year learning what it is not for. He looked down the room, at the urn, at the chair by it. You may repeat all of this anywhere you like. I should be obliged if you would. Lady Sarah Downe's eldest daughter, who had made the small sound of amusement in November, and who was 21, and had thought about it since more than anybody knew, stood up and crossed the whole length of the yellow drawing-room in front of everybody, and shook the Duke of Ithen's hand, and did not say anything at all, and sat down again. Clemence Vaughan received a packet in Wells Street on the 22nd of April, sent by the trustee's clerk in the ordinary way of business. The restated accounts, the vestry correction, the 4 printed inches, and a copy of Josiah Boulai's letter from Waterford in a clerk's fair hand. There was nothing from the Duke of Ithen in it. There was not so much as his name on the wrapper. Sir Gervase Went had proposed to her 11 days earlier, and she had told him she would give him an answer at the month's end. She came to Ithen Chase on the last evening of April, in the rain, in a hired chaise, unannounced, at 7:30. Lucien was in the music-room. He was always in the music-room in the evenings that spring, which the household found unaccountable and did not comment on, and he had the single sheet of manuscript paper with the ruled empty line propped on the stand where she had left it 16 months before. He heard the door and did not turn, because he thought it was Peveril with the lamps. "Your Grace," said Clemence Vaughan. He turned so fast that he knocked the stool over. She stood inside the door with the reins still on the shoulders of her cloak, and her bonnet in her hand, and her face very white. And she had the packet from the trustee's clerk under her arm, and she was not composed at all. It was the first time in 16 months he had seen her not composed. "You did not tell me," she said. "No. 5 weeks, the vestry, the papers, your uncle. You put your own father in the county paper, and you did not write me 1 line. If it had come to you from me," said Lucien, "it would have been a payment. You told me there was nothing I could do. You were right, there is nothing I can do about the 40 minutes. But there was a great deal I could do about your father, and it had to be done whether you ever spoke to me again or not, because it was true, and because it had been sitting in a drawer in this house while a man died. That is not a gift, Miss Vaughan. There is no version of it in which I get anything." Clemence Vaughan put the packet down on a chair, and her bonnet on top of it. "He was 54, she said. "He taught me the fingering of every one of those airs. When they took him, he told me not to write to the newspapers because it would only make it longer, and he was right, and I have hated being right for 6 years." Her voice went. "You have given him back his name in the vestry book of the church where he played the organ for 19 years. There is nothing in the world, your Grace, there is nothing in the world." "Then let it be that," said Lucian, "and nothing more." And Clemence Vaughan laughed, and wept, and crossed the room, and picked up the sheet of manuscript paper off the stand. "You kept it. It has stood there since the 11th of December. There is a space at the top of it," she said, holding it out to him with both hands, and her hands were shaking. "I ruled that line and left it empty because a dedication must be to somebody, and on the 11th of December I could not think of one honest name to put in it, and I have not been able to fill it since, and Palmer's has been asking me for the fair copy for 4 months." She looked up at him. "It is going to press in June. Tell me what to write there." The Duke of Ithan took the sheet, and looked at the empty ruled line, and set it down on the pianoforte, and took her hands instead, ink-stained fingers and all. "Write whatever you like," he said, "but before you do, hear it once properly in the room where I first heard you play it, with nobody else present and nothing owing on either side. I love you. I loved you in October, and I was a coward in November, and I have been mending in public ever since because it was the only honest way to mend. You have £140 of your own, and a publisher and Marylebourne's Kentish Acres and Gervase, Wint's Norfolk seat if you want it, and you do not need one thing that I have got. Marry me anyway." "Say the other part," said Clemence Vaughan. "Which part?" "The part you did not say in the yellow drawing-room." Lucien Ferrars looked at her properly, unhurriedly, for as long as he liked, which was the whole of the restitution there had ever been available to him. "Clemence Vaughan," he said, "is the woman I intend to marry, nothing else, nobody else, ever." They were married in July, in the parish church where her father had played the organ for 19 years, and the organist that morning was an old man who had been Edmund Vaughan's pupil, and who broke down twice in the voluntary, and was applauded for it, which is not done in churches, and was done in that one. There is a small brass tablet in the organ loft. It was put up by the vestry, not by the Duke, because Lucien had gone to considerable trouble to be refused when he offered to pay for it, and it gives Edmund Vaughan's name and his 19 years and 1 line beneath. An honest servant of this church, wronged in his lifetime and cleared after his death. The E minor air came out from Palmer's in June, and it has never been out of print, and there is a dedication at the top of it in the space where the ruled line used to be. It is 4 words long, and for a year after the wedding people in London argued about which of them it referred to, until the Duchess of Ithan was asked directly at a musical evening in Harcourt House, in a room that had gone very quiet, and answered, without looking up from the keys, "Both of us. He came late. He came. He was never late again." That is the whole of it, and the household at Ithan Chase will confirm every particular. That the Duke of Ithan spent 31 years of marriage in a chair at the end of the music room in the evenings, saying nothing, listening. That he never once in all those years walked out of a room in which his wife was speaking. And that when the Duchess came into any room at all, at Ithan, or in London, or in the smallest cottage on the estate, he stood up. Every time, even at breakfast, even when they were alone,